Have to give us something controversial.
We commit controversy for anything.
But you need me for that? I don't know.
Yes, you would
Okay.
be.
You're the enabler.
You give us enlightenment powers.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good to have you all here. Let's get started. We're actually, in Yirtzeh Hashem, going to finish Paraduma today and move on to, in Yirtzeh Hashem, next week, the death of Miriam, which is a very powerful subject, and I think we'll present some different components than we've been studying up until now. What? It's impossible to go slower.
Amen.
Okay. So page 840, no surprise there. The last two psukim, if you will, pasuk Yutes and pasuk Chaf, sort of finish out this, Well, we'll actually, you know what? I'll shake you up a little bit. Let's go to page 842. 842. Top of the page. Psukim 21 and 22 finish out this topic of the Para Aduma. Pasuk 21 says, that this will be for you, this shall be for you, a chukas olam, an eternal decree. Remember, chok, something which is not explainable. When we talk about something which is not explainable, we could be referring to the concept of how the Para Aduma helps to remove tahara, or to remove tuma, to restore tahara. Excuse me, but traditionally, this has been referred to as how the Para Aduma is mitaher the Tameim. Those who were Tameh, ritually impure, become Tahor, and yet those who were Tahor, through the process, become Tameh. That's the Chok component. That's the unknown component, the Chok component of this Para Aduma. And it is a Chukas Olam. It is an eternal Chok. Interesting. What does it mean, Chukas Olam? So Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch explains here that this is actually the source for the fact that we are not allowed to go up into certain areas of Har HaBayis. Because if you remember, the Torah has told us multiple times, twice in this section, that a person who does not undergo this process, either because the person decides, I don't want to do it, or in our case, because there's no Para Aduma available, right? We don't have a Para Aduma. We can't go through this process of Tahara from Tumas Meis. We are all essentially Tameh in Tumas Meis. So if a person who doesn't undergo this process goes into the Mikdash, what's the penalty going to be? We all learned it. What's the penalty going to be? Kares. The penalty is going to be kares. And it is a chukas olam, meaning it didn't just apply in those days, but it applies in our days as well. So if an individual who is tumas meis, which is by definition everyone's, right? Everyone is tamei meis, right? If a person who is tamei meis goes into the mikdash, so then there is going to be the punishment of kares for this individual. Meaning, if you or I were to go into the mikdash, there would be the punishment of kares. That explains why we can't walk freely on top of Har HaBayis. I mean, there might be political reasons why we can't walk freely on top of Har HaBayis. I'm talking about halachic reasons. Halachic reasons why we can't walk freely on top of Har HaBayis. Wait a second. There are people who go to Har HaBayis, right? There are people who go on top of Har HaBayis and who do it in a halachic manner. So how can they do it? If I'm not talking about people who wander onto Har HaBayis. I will tell you that many years ago, I wandered onto Har HaBayis, right? You know, I didn't even appreciate then what I was doing, right? I wandered onto Har HaBayis. Okay. I'm not talking about people who don't know and wander onto Har HaBayis. I'm talking about individuals who know and who halachically go onto Har HaBayis. How did they do it? So first of all, the important thing is to know that they don't go into those areas which are halachically defined as mikdash. In other words, we know that the Beis HaMikdash only took up a portion of the top of Har HaBayis. And that portion of non-Beis HaMikdash space was expanded by Harad. So there is space which is on top of Har HaBayis that is not considered mikdash. So the individuals who go onto the top of Har HaBayis avoid those places which are called mikdash. They have a halachic imperative to avoid those places because they're tamei meis. So they can't go into those places. But the places which are on top of Har HaBayis that are not considered mikdash still have a kedusha to them. They still have a kedusha to them, and they have to be traversed in a particular way, meaning that whatever tuma we can get rid of, we are obligated to get rid of that tuma before going into those areas. So an individual who goes on top of Har HaBayis today, who does it in a halachically approved way, has to go to mikveh before he or she goes onto top of Har HaBayis. Can't be a nida at the time that she goes on top of Har HaBayis. Is an individual who has not allowed to carry things on top of Har HaBayis. In other words, there are rules, halachic rules, for how you can go, how you can traverse the non-mikdash areas of Har HaBayis. But as far as going into the mikdash areas, as far as my going up to Har HaBayis and just walking around stam, I can't, because I'm tamei meis. And since I'm not 100% sure where are the areas that are mikdash, I have to create a wide boundary to ensure that I don't inadvertently walk through those areas, right? So that's, says Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, that's the idea of chukas olam, that this is something that continues to apply to us today, meaning that without this para aduma, we are all tamei meis, and accordingly, should we go into a place known as mikdash, we would be chayev kares. So that we're not allowed to do.
What about those tunnel tours that supposedly get you close to Kodesh Kodashim?
Those are fine.
Why?
You're
Because
not-
they're below?
You're not on Har HaBayis,
And there's
Right.
plexiglass.
right? You're
So-
outside of the wall. Going through the tunnel tour is no different than standing at the kotel.
Hotel?
It's exactly the same thing. Going through the tunnel tour is no different than standing at the kotel. No special requirements for standing at the kotel. No special requirements for going through the tunnel tour other than you have to get it, right? But no special halachic requirements for that. By the way, there are individuals who are very careful not to put their fingers in between the stones of the kotel. Now, that by definition means that you can't put a kvittel there, right? Because there's no way to get the kvittel there. But they're very careful not to put their fingers, in between the stones. Those little,
Crevices.
those little crevices. Why is that? Because the question is, where does the wall, in other words, where does the wall end, and where does the outer, what's considered the outer part of the wall and what's considered the inner part of the wall? So for instance, if this is a wall, right? Here's the kotel part, right? Here's the kotel part. Here's the mountain part, okay? So where does the mountain part begin? Does the mountain part begin here at this cover, right? In other words, at this end, or does it begin in here? At this, in other words, does the mountain come all the way through to here? And this entire thing is considered mountain, in which case I can't put my fingers in unless I've gone to mikveh already? Or is this entire thing considered retaining wall and mountain doesn't start until the inside? If mountain doesn't start until the inside, so then I can put my fingers, I can put my kvittel in the kotel, I can put my fingers in the kotel.
Within the thickness of the stone, how much depth it has, definitely the wall.
Well,
Rather
no,
than-
there's no question that it's a wall. The question is, what's the halachic status of the wall? What's the halachic status of the depth of those stones?
Right.
Is the halachic status of the depth of those stones considered exterior wall, right? Or is the halachic status of the depth of those stones considered part of the mountain? That's really the question, right? I think the majority of us would put our fingers in there. There are individuals who are particularly careful not to do that. If you want to avoid all questions, go to the mikvah before you do it, and if, that will take care of all of the questions. Okay, so that's the chukas olam. Until this very day, we have this issue. We have this chukas olam. Now the pasuk continues and says, not only that, but says the pasuk, umazeh mei hanida yechabes bigadav. Okay, how do you translate umazeh? What is the umazeh? Page 842, top of the page, verse 21. Who is the umazeh? The one who sprinkles, right? Hazaya is sprinkling. Umazeh is the one who sprinkles. So what does the pasuk tell us? Umazeh mei hanida, the one who sprinkles. Remember, there was a sprinkler, right? He took the hyssop and the cedar, this paintbrush, if you will, and he dipped it into the mixture and he sprinkled. He sprinkled on the people, he sprinkled on the house, whatever needed to be sprinkled, he sprinkled. Umazeh mei hanida yechabes bigadav. Okay, and the person who sprinkles this water of the mixture of ashes of paraduma and mayim chayim, yechabes begadav. What does yechabes begadav mean? Well, obviously it doesn't mean wash his clothes, right? We're not talking about, there's not a Tide commercial here. What are we referring to? Look, the English translates it as shall immerse his clothing, right? Yechabes begadav. Whenever we've been dealing with yechabes begadav, it doesn't mean to wash your clothing because they're dirty or they're stained. It means yechabes begadav, to immerse your clothing. Why would he need to immerse his clothing? Why would an individual need to immerse clothes? Why do you immerse anything? Because it's tameh. How does his clothing become tameh? How does his clothing become tameh? You guys are definitely not awake this morning.
It's from his sprinkling.
Right? His clothing becomes tameh from his sprinkling, meaning he becomes tameh. Right? He becomes tameh because his clothing becomes tameh because he's wearing his clothing. Right? He becomes tameh through the sprinkling. That seems to be the simple interpretation of what the Torah is telling us, meaning that the person who sprinkles the ash, this ash water mixture, he becomes tameh. The mazeh, the sprinkler, becomes tameh. That wouldn't surprise us. Why not? Oh, so that's very interesting. That's a very interesting interpretation, that the water could hit him also, right? That the water could, because when you sprinkle, right, you know what happens, right? You sprinkle, you could get sprinkled, you could get sprinkled on inadvertently. So that's an interesting interpretation, that maybe he becomes tameh because the water, right, the water sprinkles back on him. Actually, one of the commentaries suggests that, right? The Rabbeinu Bechaye says he should become tameh because, the water is going to sprinkle back on him, exactly as you suggested. However, Rashi is going to tell us something different, right? Look at Rashi. What does Rashi say? So Rashi says we are,
The first one on page 842.
okay, 842, top line of Rashi, umazem mei hanida, Rabboseinu amru, the rabbis have said, shehamazeh tahor. That what? That the one who sprinkles is tahor. Wait a second. What does the pasuk say? Forget Rashi and the rabbis for a moment. What seems to be the simple meaning of the pasuk? The simple meaning of the pasuk seems to be that he is impure. Umazeh mei hanida yechabez begadav, right? How else would you translate that? But Rashi comes along and says the simple meaning is not the correct meaning of this pasuk, right?
Is there
That
more
the
than one sprinkler?
what?
Is there more than one sprinkler?
There could be. There could be. Excuse me, but anybody who sprinkles is not tameh according to Rashi. And Rashi is not making this up. Rashi is saying that this is following from the Gemara in Maseches Yoma, where the Gemara Maseches Yoma says that the person who sprinkles is not tameh. Right? Now, let's think about that for a second. Okay? The person who sprinkles is not tameh. True, it's not the pshat. It's not what seems to be pshat here, right? It's not what the literal wording of the Torah seems to mean, and we have to understand why it's not, which we'll come to in a minute. But tell me logically, why can't the person who sprinkles become tameh? Let me paint the scenario for you, okay? I'm designated with the job of sprinkling the waters of the Parah, okay? Now, what happens? I'm assigned to go to that house over there, and I have to sprinkle on the house, and I have to sprinkle on the kelim, and I have to sprinkle on the people. What's gonna, if I were to be,
Then you wouldn't be able to transfer the.
in other words, from a logical perspective, at what point would I, if the sprinkler became tameh, at what
You would never
point,
be able to.
at what point would I become tameh? In other words, as soon as I went like this, right? Well, maybe if as soon as I went like this, I became tameh. So that means whatever benefited from that first sprinkle became tahor. But what about everything else? We know the sprinkler has to be an ish tahor. So how could it be, logically speaking, that I become tameh if I sprinkle? How could I ever sprinkle on or ever do more than one sprinkle, right? And yet the psukim that we read previously say, I sprinkle on the house and I sprinkle on the kelim and I sprinkle on the person. In order for that to be true, the mazeh, the sprinkler, can't become tameh, because otherwise it wouldn't work. Otherwise you'd have to have like, I don't know, maybe 10 sprinklers, right? 10 sprinklers lined up. I sprinkle once and then I'm done. I retire. And then somebody else comes along and sprinkles once and he retires, right? But that does not seem to be the meaning that the Torah gives here. So from a logical perspective, the sprinkler should not become tameh, from a logical perspective. But we also see it in the psukim as well. Look, go back to page 840. Don't think I was going to let you escape completely. Go back to 840. Look at verse 18.
Ish tahor.
Okay, verse 18. V'lakach, this is the beginning of the sprinkling process. V'lakach ezov, the person takes an ezov, the hyssop, v'taval b'mayim, and he dips it into the water. Who is this person? Ish tahor. He has to be a pure person, right? It has to be a person who's tahor. V'hiza al ha'ohel, and he then sprinkles it on the ohel, v'al kol ha'kelim, and on all the utensils, v'al ha'nefashas, and on all the people, asher hayusham, v'al ha'nogeya, and he sprinkles it also on whoever touches, ba'etzem, a bone, or b'chalal, or a grave, or b'meis, or a dead body, or b'cover. Okay, sprinkles it. Okay, so we know he sprinkles it. And who does he have to be? An ish tahor. The Torah tells us he has to be an ish tahor. Pasuk 19. Vihiza, and he sprinkles. Who sprinkles? Hatahor al hatameh bayom hashlishi bayom hashvi, on the third day and on the seventh day. Wait a second. Pasuk 18 tells us he's an ish tahor. Pasuk 19 should simply say him, that guy, right? It's a continuation of Pasuk 18, right? Why does it have to tell us again tahor? It doesn't make sense to tell us again tahor. So the rabbis say, well, if the Torah is telling us tahor and there's no reason to tell us tahor, it must be coming to teach me something. What is it coming to teach me? Darshan, the rabbis in the Gemara. It's coming to teach me that the person who sprinkles remains tahor. That the sprinkler remains tahor. I think you see this in the art scroll note. Maybe explains it more eloquently than I have.
843.
Okay, the bottom of 842 and the top of 843 in the note. Okay, explains that that why logically it doesn't work, and I've just explained to you why, according to the psukim, it doesn't seem to work either. In other words, for verse 19 to say tahor, there has to be a message behind that tahor. What's the message? The message is the sprinkler remains tahor. If that's the case, if the sprinkler remains tahor, and that's the reason why Rashi doesn't translate it in its pshat way, so why does the Torah have to tell us? Why does it use the term umazeh? Why does it use the term of sprinkler if it's not referring to the sprinkler, right? If the sprinkler doesn't become tameh, why does it use the term umazeh? So look at Rashi, back to the Rashi on page 842. Rashi says, right, v'zeh ba lilamed, this comes to teach me, says Rashi, top line, right column, shahanosei mei chatat, that the person who carries the mei chatat, tamei tuma chamura litamei bigadim sha'alav. That what? The person who is responsible for carrying this water and bringing it to the individual who is sprinkling, that person becomes tameh, so tameh that not only him, but even his clothing become tameh. That's the carrier. If we're talking about the carrier, why doesn't it say v'hanoseh? Why does it say umazeh? Why doesn't it say the carrier? Why does it say the sprinkler? Says Rashi to tell us that the only time the carrier becomes tameh is if he is carrying a quantity of water which is appropriate for sprinkling. Meaning that if he's carrying a container of water and ashes that only has a little bit at the bottom, that there's not enough to wet the brush to sprinkle, he doesn't become tameh. He only becomes tameh if he is carrying a container that has enough water to sprinkle. Why? It's a chok. We don't know why, right? That's what the Torah tells us. We don't understand why certain of these individuals become tameh and certain of these individuals don't become tameh. So we know the person who burned the parah became tameh, the person who collected the ashes became tameh, the person who carries becomes tameh, the person who makes the mixture becomes tameh, but the sprinkler doesn't become tameh. Again, part of the mystery of how the para aduma works. Okay, so that's one idea, which is here in verse 21, that the mazeh, not the sprinkler, but the one who's carrying enough water, a quantity of water that works for sprinkling, he becomes tameh, so much so that not only he, but his clothing become tameh as well. And not only that, but v'hanogeya b'mei nidah yitma'at ha'er. Whoever touches the water becomes tameh for the evening. And whoever touches the water. So it's interesting because the Rabbeinu B'chaye suggests, as you thought, that maybe they should become tameh because maybe the water bounces back on him.
The same thing with the carrying, that it might spill.
That it might spill on you, but nevertheless, Rabbeinu B'chaye says at the end, that's what I think, but obviously that's not what the Torah says, right? The rabbis have a tradition that this does not mean as it literally should be interpreted, but rather it means something a little bit different, okay? And finally, this last piece, right? The last pasuk, which sort of sums up everything up until this point, says, pasuk 22, V'chol asher yiga bo hatameh yitma. And whatever the person who is tameh mace touches, yitma, it shall become tameh. And we've learned that already. In other words, we've learned how a person becomes tameh through contact or through space with a dead body. And what the Torah is now telling us is that person can transmit tuma to another person, which is a little bit of an unusual situation, because usually something which becomes tameh can transmit tuma to food or to drink, but not to another person. Here we're being told that whatever the person who becomes tameh touches becomes tameh as well. Not as tameh as the person who, the transmitter. So for instance, I touched a dead body, or I was in the room with a dead body. What happens to me? I become tameh mace. I become tameh mace. 7 days. Sprinkling on the 3rd day, sprinkling on the 7th day. I have to immerse in the mikvah on the 7th day. And after it becomes dark, I'm okay. Okay? I was in the room with the dead body, or I touched the dead body. However, let's say on the 3rd day, right? On the 3rd day, after my sprinkling, I touched somebody else. I shook hands with my friend. What happens to my friend? Not my friend anymore. Why? Because now he's tameh. All right, now he's tameh. Is he tameh the same level that I'm tameh?
He's a level down.
He's a level down. He's not tameh the same way that I'm tameh. He doesn't have to wait 7 days. He doesn't need to be sprinkled on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. He does need to go to the mikveh, and he does have to wait until dark, but he's not tameh the same way that I'm tameh. This is something that we've learned, how tuma gets transmitted from one item to another item. Okay. Now, in Yirtzeh Hashem, when the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt, we are all going to have to become experts in how this concept of tuma is transferred.
You can't just call your local rabbi?
Right? I don't know. Maybe you'll be able to. Right? How the tuma is transferred and how the tahara is ultimately affected. But this last idea is telling us that tuma is transmitted from the person who came in contact with the dead body to another person. And that other person, v'hanefesh hanogas titma ad ha'arev. That person is only tameh until the evening, goes to the mikveh, right? And then when it's nighttime, he's no longer tameh. So,
Does it keep on diminishing? Like if that person touched, or if he touches someone else?
So the person who's dead is the avi avot hatuma. He is the grandfather, if you will, right? The main category of tuma. Avi avot hatuma. The person who comes either into contact with him or in the same house as him, he becomes an av hatuma. The person he touches.
So it's like 100%, 75%.
Well, you can't. I mean, you're right, but the percentages don't work because they're in other words, if I touch the body, I'm an av hatuma. The body's an avi avos hatuma, I'm an av hatuma. I touch my friend becomes a vlad hatuma.
Oh,
Right?
he's not going to transmit.
Right? He can't transmit to another person. Right? I can transmit to another person because I'm an av hatuma. As long as I'm tameh mace, I can transmit to another person. He can't transmit to another person. So yes, it's a diminishing, but I don't know how the numbers.
But it's not.
It stops. He can still transmit to food, right? So it doesn't stop completely, but pretty much it stops with him. Okay. So imagine living in the days of the Beit HaMikdash, where we had to deal with Tuma and Tahara and all of these things, right? This was a major issue. And imagine how difficult it was for a Kohen to remain tahor. In other words, today, the Kohen, he doesn't go into the cemetery, he doesn't go into the funeral home, and that's probably the extent of his connection to it. In those days, it was much, much more difficult, right? Much more difficult to avoid becoming tameh. And if you were a Kohen, you had to pay, or a Nazir, you had to pay particular attention to it, right? To make sure that you weren't, because there was a prohibition for you to become tameh. For a stam person, there was no prohibition to become tameh. There were just results of your becoming tameh, no prohibition. But for a Kohen or a Nazir, there was a prohibition from becoming tameh. Okay, to finally put this all together, Rashi now goes on an excursus where Rashi tells us everything I've explained up until now has been the halachic interpretation. Now I'm going to tell you the midrashic interpretation of the para aduma. Okay, very unusual for Rashi to do, but that's what Rashi is now going to do for us. So look on page 842. I want you to count down from Rashi, from the top of the lines in Rashi. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 lines down. I guess 7 lines down, right? 7 lines down. At the beginning of the line, it says, Zehu perusha lefi mashma behilchotel. You have it? Okay, everybody have it? You know why your fingers are shaped like this? You ever hear that? Why are our fingers like sort of, they narrow down at the end, right? Why don't we have little stubby fingers? I mean, I guess some people have little stubby fingers, right, but why don't we have little stubby fingers? Right, not for texting, interesting. All right, interesting. No, because you can keep the place, right? In other words, they serve as pointers, you can keep the place. You know the second reason, by the way? The second reason?
Ears or something?
Yeah, the second reason is Hashem made your fingers to fit exactly into your ears. So if you hear something that, if somebody's saying something you're not supposed to listen to, you just have to plug up your ears like that. Think about it, right? Everybody's fingers fits right into their ears, right? And now, they fit in other places also, which my grandchildren know about. But, right, but the idea, you know, fit right into your ears. Okay. So listen to what Rashi says. Keep your finger on the place. Rashi says, "Umidrash agada ha'etakti miyisodo shel Rebbe Moshe HaDarshan." Anybody ever hear of Rebbe Moshe HaDarshan before? If you learn Rashi, Rebbe Moshe HaDarshan was a rabbi who lived in France at the time and was one of Rashi's teachers. Rebbe Moshe HaDarshan, right? Rebbe Moshe who interpreted things midrashically, if you will, HaDarshan. So listen to how Rashi understands this now. Vizehu, and here is the interpretation. Vayikchu elecha. Rashi is now going back to the very beginning. I'm not going to make you go back to the beginning, but to the very beginning of this discussion of the para aduma. And he's going to reinterpret phrases to teach us that there's a fundamental concept here in para aduma, which you know already, but now we're going to see it in Rashi. Vayikchu elecha, right? You shall take elecha to you, says Rashi, mishelahem. It has to belong to you. Why does it have to belong to you? Right? Why does it have to belong to you? So Rabbi Moshe HaDarshan explains, Kishem shehem parku nizmei hazahav le'egel mishelahem. The same way in which they took the jewelry to make the golden calf. Where did that jewelry come from? Mishelahem. It was their jewelry, meaning they were willing to give up their jewelry. We're not talking about the women, because the women were not willing to give up their jewelry. Right? We know that it's not so easy for a woman to part with her jewelry. Right? So the husbands came to their wives and they said, "We need your jewelry for the Egel Azav," and I can't repeat what the wives said to the husband. Right? The wives did not give up their jewelry freely. Of course. Wait, you mean there are women who are not Sikaniot?
Really,
Okay, so Sue says it has nothing to do with their jewelry. It has to do with their righteousness. That they would never have given up their jewelry for the Egel Azav. They would have given up their jewelry for other things, but they would never have given up their jewelry for the Egel Azav. Okay, Sue, in your name, we have clarified that. Okay, so says Moshe HaDarshan, who Rashi is quoting, the same way that people gave up of their own things, the men gave up of their own things in order to make the Egel Hazav. Now, if you give up something that's yours, it means you have a certain commitment to this, right? In other words, it's one thing to say, okay, you give your jewelry, I'm not giving my jewelry. But the fact that I'm giving my gold is an indication that I consider this important. How do we fix that? How do we repair that? Says Moshe HaDarshan, Kach yaviu zo lekapara mishelahem. So too, when they take the Egel this para aduma, it has to belong to them. They have to give up something of their own. In other words, you can't take a para aduma that doesn't belong to you. You have to acquire the para aduma, because you have to, in order to repair the sin of the golden calf, which is the fundamental premise of Rav Moshe Hadarshan, that the para aduma is coming to repair the sin of the golden calf. Just like the golden calf resulted from things that belonged to the Jews, so too the para aduma, which fixes it, has to belong to the Jews. It has to be a para aduma, a red calf. Why is that? Mashal, why does it, here Rav Moshe Darshan is talking about why it's a para, not why it's red, but why it's a para, why is it a cow? Says the Rav Moshe Darshan, Mashal, this is a parable, it's analogous to a ben shifcha, to the son of a handmaid, the son of a woman's son, shetine platin, who messed up the palace. In other words, what happened? The woman's son came along and made a mess of the palace. So who's supposed to clean it up? Who's supposed to clean up the mess? Says Rav Moshe Hadarshan, Amru, they said, Tavo imo v'tikanea hatzoa, right? That what happens? That the mother should come and clean up after her child. So what's the idea that the mother should come and clean up after her child? That's part of a mother's responsibility. It's actually part of a father's responsibility also, although lots of fathers don't know that, right? Part of a father's responsibility as well. But the mother should come and clean up after her child. If the mother should come and clean up after her child, in other words, the mother is the one who fixes the mess that the child made. So the para, who is the cow, comes along to, quote, fix the mess that its offspring, the egel, made. And egel is a calf, right? The golden calf, the red cow. The cow, I mean, even though they're not related, these two, right? The cow comes along as the parent to fix the transgression that that came about as a result of the offspring of the egel. So that's how Rav Moshe Hadarshan understands para.
The golden calf was not a living thing to have offspring.
No, 100%.
I'm sure it breaks down a little.
It's right. It's,
Just a metaphor.
right. This is a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor. We call it an egel, right? You're right. It was gold. It wasn't a living thing, but we call it. They formed it into the shape of an egel, right? So it was a calf. So symbolically, the cow, who is the parent, is coming to fix that which its offspring created, that which the egel created. Again, it's Rav Moshe Hadarshan. It's more of a midrashic, agadic interpretation. He's presenting this connection between the two. Okay.
Is he suggesting, though, that had we not sinned with the egel, we wouldn't have Parshat Chumash?
Ah, very interesting. Okay. So is Rav Moshe Hadarshan saying that this concept of the para aduma never would have existed if there had not been a chet ha'egel? If there had not been a chet ha'egel, would we need, right? Would we have tumas meis? Would we need the para aduma? It could be no. Or it could be that Rav Moshe Hadarshan is saying no. Or it could be that Rav Moshe Darshan is saying is that a Kadosh Baruch Hu put this all into play because he knew there was going to be a Chet HaEgel, and therefore knew that we were going to need this tikkun, this fix for the Chet HaEgel. Interesting when we're going to get to those parshios coming up quickly, right? Truma titzave kisisa vayakel pekude. Right, kisisa. Right, kisisa. Right, kisisa. It talks about the egel azav, and it's in the middle. In other words, we have truma tetzava, which talk about the building of the mishkan. Then we have kisisa, and then we have vayakel pekude that sum up the building of the mishkan. So the question is, if there had never been an egel azav, would we have had a need for a mishkan? Is the Mishkan a repair for the Egel Azav? One interpretation, or no, the Mishkan always was intending to be was always intended to be part of the Jewish people. It was the continuation of the Sinai experience. It has nothing to do with the Egel Hazav. So interesting debate, which perhaps we can apply to this as well. Okay, let's continue. Aduma, right? The para had to be red. Why? Al Shem, because of the pasuk from Yeshayahu that says, Im ya'adimu katola, if your sins will be red, if your actions or your sins will be red like the crimson that comes from the worm. Okay, what does that mean? Red is a symbol of, red's a symbol of chait. It's a symbol of transgression. It's a symbol of doing the wrong thing, right? So at the State of the Union, you might find people who are dressed in black, and people who are dressed in white, and people even who are dressed in blue. But what you won't find is somebody who's dressed in red. I don't think there were any red dresses or red blazers at the State of the Union address.
There were.
There were?
Yes, because I watched it. They stood out.
There might have been red ties, but red.
No, they were red. But
All right, I don't know who was wearing red, but maybe.
I don't know.
Okay.
Who.
Okay.
I saw that.
So red is considered traditionally a sign of transgression, right? Think back to the thread that was tied around the horns of the goat sent out to Azazel. What happened to that thread? What happened to that thread? Turned white, right? It was red. It was a dyed red thread, and it turned white when the goat died, if God had forgiven the Jewish people, right? It didn't always turn white, right? But it turned white if God had forgiven the Jewish people.
Scarlet letter, even into modern history.
Hester
let's say.
Correct. Okay. Shahachet, Rashi continues, Shahachet karoi edom, right? The chet is considered red. Red is a sign of transgression. Okay. Timima, it had to be not only red, but it had to be timima, right? It had to be unblemished. Why did it have to be unblemished? Says Rashi, quoting of Marsha Hadarshan, Al Shem Yisrael Shahayu Timimim, because the Jewish people before the Chet HaEgel were Timimim, they were unblemished. They had just come from, right, they had just experienced Matan Torah and Har Sinai. B'na'asu bo ba'alei mumim. And through the Egel HaZahav, what happened to them? They became blemished. So if they became blemished through the Egel HaZahav, and the Para Aduma is supposed to be the fix for the Egel HaZahav, it has to be the opposite of blemished. The opposite of blemished is unblemished. Has to be timima. The Para Aduma is not allowed to have a blemish on it. Okay. Lo Allah aleha ol. It is not allowed to have worked, right? This Para Aduma had to have never been harnessed to a yoke. Kishem, what's the idea? What does it have to do with it? What's this idea of that it could never have borne a yoke? So says Rashi, quoting Rav Moshe Darshan, Kishem sheparku me'alehem ol shamayim. In other words, what did the Jewish people do when they worshipped the Egel HaZahav? They threw off the yoke of heaven. When we talk about an ol, we talk about a yoke. So we're thinking about a yoke that you harness an animal to plow. However, we also talk about an ol malchut shamayim, that there has to be an acceptance of the yoke of heaven. What does that mean? What's the acceptance of the yoke of heaven mean? It means that you can't do whatever you want to do, right? If an animal is within a yoke, what does that mean? That the animal is limited, right? The animal is controlled. The animal is limited in its behavior. If the animal wants to do something, the yoke can prevent it from doing that. If the animal throws off the yoke, what does that mean? That it wants to do whatever it wants to do. Same thing by an individual. We have what we call Kabbalah's ol malchut shamayim. We are supposed to accept upon ourselves that we do not have absolute freedom. That our actions are limited. Our actions are limited by halacha, right? There are certain things we can do, certain things we can't do. I want to go have a cheeseburger. I can't just go have a cheeseburger, right? My actions are limited by halacha. That's ol malchut shamayim. This Para Aduma was never allowed to have borne a yoke. Why? Because just like Bnei Yisrael threw off the yoke when they worshiped the golden calf, so too, in order to repair it, we have to have an animal that never wore a yoke so that it wouldn't know what throwing off a yoke is. So again, Rav Moshe Darshan, not just the repair. Finally, he continues, Elazar HaKohen, who is the one who burns the Para Aduma? Elazar, right? Elazar HaKohen, not Aaron the Kohen Gadol, Elazar HaKohen. Why? Says Rashi, quoting Rav Moshe Darshan, Kishem shenikalu ala Haron shu Kohen la'asot ha'egel, ulefi she'aharon asat ha'egel lo natna lo avodah zo al yado she'ein kategor na'ases sanegor. Right, a very famous line. Why was Aharon not charged with performing the ritual of the Para Aduma? Because Aharon was the one who was involved in the Egel HaZahav. If the Para Aduma is supposed to be a fix, a kapara for the Egel HaZahav, so how does it look that the individual who was involved in the Egel HaZahav, he's the same person who's involved in the Para Aduma? That doesn't make sense. So therefore, it wasn't given to Aaron, it was given to his son Elazar. Elazar was the one who did it. She'ein kategor na'ases sanegor, right? Because an accuser, a kategor is an accuser. In other words, someone who represents an accusation can't become the epitome of a defender. So here's an interesting halacha, right? You know that on Yom Kippurim, we don't wear gold jewelry, right? Why not? You can wear jewelry, but you can't wear gold jewelry because of the Egel HaZahav. Ein kategor na'ases sanegor, right? That's why a shofar that's blown on Rosh Hashanah can't be a golden shofar. Ein kategor na'ases sanegor. You can't take something that represents a transgression and and try to turn it around and have it become the object through which you are forgiven. So as a result, Elazar was given this and not Aaron. We're almost done. V'sarafes hapara kishem shenisraf ha'egel. What was the end result for the Egel HaZahav? You remember Moshe Rabbeinu ground it up, burnt it and ground it up and threw it into the water, and Bnei Israel had to drink the water. So too, just like the Egel was burnt, the para is also burnt. And finally, Eitz Erez ve'ezov u'shni tolas. Why these three items? Shlosha minim halalu kineged shloshes alefei ish naflu be'egel. Says Rashi, these three items represent the 3,000 people who died at the time of the Chet HaEgel. Which, if you think about it, 3,000 people is not that many, right? How many people were there at the time? 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60. 1.5 million people, let's say, counting women and children and older and young, right? So 3,000 died, right? So it's not like doesn't seem to be like a terrible stain. It's just something for you to think about, right? That 3,000 people in the Chet HaEgel, but the 3,000 are connected or symbolized by these three elements.
During the Chet HaEgel, are there any commentaries that describe what Elazar's role was? Was he trying to dissuade his father?
I don't know of any. Okay. And says Rashi, top of the second column, the Erez hu hagavoa mikol ha'ilanos, the cedar tree is the tallest of all of the trees. The Azov and the Hyssop namoch mikulam is the lowest, right? It grows, as we learned, grows in the buildings, right? It grows close to the ground. Siman, this is symbolically to teach us Shehagavoa sheniska v'chata, right? That the big one, the mighty person, the haughty person who transgressed, how does he repair that? Says Rashi, Yashpil et atzmo, he should lower himself, humble himself, ka'ezov, like the hyssop, bitolas, and like the worm, the yiska perlo. And that act of humbling himself will bring about his kapara. In other words, as long as a person is haughty, as long as a person thinks he didn't do anything wrong, no chance of tshuva. You have to humble yourself a little bit and acknowledge that what you did is wrong, and then tshuva results. And it has to be limishmeres, says Rashi, Kemo shepasha ha'egel, I'm sorry, Kemo shepeshel ha'egel, shamor ledoros lepur anus. Just like the sin of the Egel Hazav is something that continues with us throughout all of the generations. In other words, she'ein lecha pikuda she'ein ba mi pikudas ha'egel. This sin of the golden calf is something that has continued throughout the generations. In every little bit of chet, there is an element of this Egel Hazav, an element of this taint that remains with the Jewish people. So too, the paraduma has to be kept as a mishmeret, meaning kach para mitama kol ha'oskim ba, right? Kishem she'egel mitame kol ha'oskim ba, same way in which the egel made people who dealt with the tame, kach para mitama kol ha'oskim ba, or kishem shenitaru be'afaro, or shenemar v'yazer al pnei hamayim, kach belakchula tamei me'afar sreifas hachatas. So Rashi says what? The same way in which individuals became tahor. In other words, individuals were spared through the drinking of the water mixed with the ashes of the Egel Hazav, so too individuals will become tahor through being sprinkled by the water containing the ashes of the paraduma. The basic premise here is that the paraduma is the antidote to the Egel Hazav. Whatever happened with the Egel Hazav, the paraduma is meant to offset that. And all of these elements, says Rashi, says Rav Moshe Darshan, all of these elements of the paraduma are connected to the Egel Hazav. Okay, so that's really it. That's our exposure to Tuma and Tara, to the paraduma, a very difficult passage to understand. You have different ways of explaining it, different ways of explaining Tuma, different ways of explaining how the paraduma works. In Yirtzeh Hashem, we should all be zochet to live at a time when, once again, these laws of Tum and Tara will apply to us. Let's get started on the next section, okay? What's the next section? Vayavau b'nei Yisrael kol ha'edam midbar tzin, that the Jewish people, the entire congregation, came to Midbar Tzin, the desert, the wilderness of Tzin, when? B'chodesh harishon, in the first month, Vayeshev ha'am b'kadesh, and the people dwelt in Kadesh. Vatamas sham Miriam, and Miriam died there. Vatikaver sham, and she was buried there. Okay. What are we talking about? When are we talking about? When are we talking about?
We're almost there.
Right? This is 38 years after Bnei Yisrael have left Mitzrayim. In other words, Miriam was alive for pretty much the entirety of the journey of the Jewish people through the Midbar. And now we've reached the end, we're reaching the end of that journey, and Miriam dies. Any other women died in the desert? Many? Why?
Because I thought that the previous generation died off.
The previous generation did die off, but only the men of the previous generation died off. Right? Only the men. Right? Only the men were the ones who were punished at the time of the Meraglim. Why only the men? Because the men were the ones who refused to make war, right? It was the men who would do battle. It was the men who weren't willing to step up to the plate. It wasn't the women, right? It was the men. And as a result, it was the men, it was that generation, those 600,000 between the ages of 20 and 40 who died and didn't go into the Midbar. Men who were under the age of 20, they grew up and went into Eretz Yisrael. People who were over the age of 60 went into Eretz Yisrael. Women went into Eretz Yisrael. There was one woman who died in the Midbar, and her name was Miriam. All right, we have to figure out why. What did Miriam do? Did she die? Is Miriam being punished for something? Think back for a moment. We know that Moshe and Aharon died in the Midbar, right? Moshe and Aharon did not make it into Eretz Yisrael. Right, so everybody knows, why did Moshe die? Because he hit the rock, right? You guys are so shy today. What's going on? I'm not exactly sure. Something's in the air. I'm not sure what's going on here, right? Moshe hit the rock, right? Moshe hit the rock, and that's what happened. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu didn't go into Eretz Yisrael, or because he called the people rebels, whatever it is. He did something wrong, and as a result of doing something wrong, he didn't go into Eretz Yisrael. Aaron also did something wrong, didn't go into Eretz Yisrael. Did Miriam do anything wrong? So Miriam spoke Lashon Hara. The fact that Miriam spoke Lashon Hara about her brother Moshe, is that what prevented her from going into Eretz Yisrael? Is that the reason why Miriam died? So this is all something that we need to.
Was she the only woman who spoke Lashon Hara?
No.
What about Aaron?
Okay, so these are some of the questions that we are going to need to explore as we begin this new section. But let's first of all try to understand. Vayavau b'nei Yisrael kol ha'ida midbar tzin b'chodesh harishon. So we're talking about the chodesh harishon. What is the chodesh harishon? Nisan, right? Nisan is the first month, and all of the Jewish people kol ha'ida. Interesting. Why does the Torah have to tell us both of these expressions? Vayavau, right? Vayavau b'nei Yisrael kol ha'eda, right? That the Jewish people, the entire Eda, came to Midbar Tzin. Why do we need both expressions? Kol ha'eda. So, what? Look at Rashi. What does Rashi say? Rashi says kol ha'eda. Eda hashlema. In other words, this is the complete congregation. Shekvar mesu misei midbar, because the ones who are destined to die in the desert have already died. Ve'elu parsu l'chaim, and these are parshu l'chaim, and these were the ones who were separated out for life. Right? These were the ones who were separated out for life. So this gives rise to a very interesting day of celebration. Yesterday was Tu B'Shvat, right? Tu B'Shvat is an interesting day. Exactly what Tu B'Shvat symbolizes, right? I think a lot of us think that Tu B'Shvat is the beginning of spring. I think anybody who went outside this morning has to question that. Right? Tu B'Shvat is not the beginning of spring, certainly not in North America. Tu B'Shvat might be the beginning of spring in Israel, but if you're in Israel, it might not be the beginning of spring either. Tu B'Shvat is actually the transition, the time when they say in Israel more than 50% of the water that is going to fall throughout the year has fallen already. And once the trees have received more than 50% of the water that they need, they start to produce the sap that carries the nutrients and minerals from the soil up through the rest of the tree, so the tree can re-blossom. So Tu B'Shvat marks the point at which that sap starts to make the journey up that tree. It's, if you will, the rebirth of the tree. Now, we don't see that rebirth until several months later, but Tu B'Shvat is the time when that sap begins to make its journey from the roots of the tree up through the tree, carrying the nutrients that enable the tree to re-blossom. Okay, so Tu B'Shvat brings to mind another Tu. What other day is Tu? Tu B'Av, right? The 15th of Shvat and the 15th of Av. The halacha actually mentions both of them together, saying we don't say Tachanon on Tu B'Shvat, we don't say Tachanon on Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av was a day of celebration. Why was Tu B'Av a day of celebration? Because how did the people who died in the desert, how did they die? Did they get the flu?
They didn't wake up in the morning, right?
Right? So every Tisha B'Av, the Jews who were between the ages of 20 and 60, who had left Egypt, dug graves in the desert. They dug graves, and that night they slept in the graves. And in the morning, not everybody got up, right? So be careful where you sleep, right? In the morning, not everybody got up, right? The people who had died the night before they were buried, and they traveled, and Bnei Israel traveled on until the last year in which they were dying. And the last year in which they were dying came Tisha B'Av, They dug the graves. In the morning, what happened? Everybody got up. Nobody was dying anymore. Everybody got up.
So this was a nightly ritual?
This was a Tisha B'Av ritual,
An
No,
annual.
they
ritual.
don't.
an annual ritual. Now, so everybody got up in the morning. So what did they think? They thought they had the wrong day, right? They didn't have calendars per se. They were keeping track. So they thought they had the wrong day. So they did it again the next night. And everybody got up the following morning. And they did that until the 15th of the month. How did they know it was the 15th of the month? The full moon. So on the 15th of the month, when they saw the full moon in Av, they realized that they had not missed the day and that the dying had stopped. And that's why Tu B'Av became a day of celebration, right? So Tu B'Av, the 15th of the month of Av, indicated the year in which the dying stopped in Egypt, in the desert. What year was that of the journey of Bnei Israel?
38.
Was that year 38? Was that year 39? Was that year 40? Right? When did the dying stop?
According to this.
Right? So according to this, it would seem, when did it stop?
38.
38. It stopped in 38. Well, actually it stopped, right, in Nisan of 38, right? Because it stopped in, so Tisha B'Av, right? It stopped in Av of maybe of year 30, Av of year 37, right? It'd have to be Av of year 37. So that's something we have to think about. Did it really stop in Av of year 37, meaning in year 38, 39, and 40, nobody died? Is that what we're being told here? So that's something that in Yirtzeh
How do
Hashem
we
we're going
know
to
that
focus
this
on,
is year 38?
because the English tells us.
There's
All right.
nothing in the Psukim though.
It says nearly 38 years had passed. We're gonna have to go through. We'll go through all of this and see. Okay. So in Yirtzeh Hashem, I will see you next week,
Thank
So is
and
that
we will
Tisha
continue.
B'Av before
That would be Tisha B'Av year 37.
37, before
would
the
see.
38?
Yeah. So we're gonna go.
Year
We're gonna go
of
through.
Egypt.
Yeah, we're gonna go through all of the. We're gonna go through the chronology. Maybe I'll make you a handout. Okay. All right. Have a great day, everybody.
How we use